Dougal's hobby. It was her own fault, Nora had realised. She'd made a big mistake. When she'd told Dougal he should get himself a hobby, Nora had been envisioning something outdoorsy. Bird watching, gardening, that sort of thing. Anything really, as long as it got Dougal out of the house for a bit. Since his retirement, he'd done nothing but get under her feet, and Nora had decided enough was enough. However, her suggestion that Dougal might like to get out in the fresh air had been met with a standard, "What would I want to do that for?" before he returned his attention to the television. So, undeterred, she'd been down to the library to find him numbers for the local hobby groups. She'd suggested the book club, the life drawing class, and even the local amateur dramatic society, who were specifically looking for men of a certain age. That wouldn't have been too bad, Nora thought. True, she'd probably have had to help him run his lines, but she would have had the satisfaction of sitting in the front row on opening night as Dougal gave a performance the critic at their local paper was sure to call spellbinding. But no, Dougal had turned up his nose at all her suggestions and had found a hobby all on his own. She supposed that she should feel grateful that he'd done as she asked for a change. But why couldn't he have picked a quiet hobby? Or at the very least, if it had to be noisy, couldn't it be noisy a long way away? At no point had she considered the notion that Dougal would decide to join the local brass band and spend all his waking hours practicing his newly acquired trumpet. Hour after hour of When the Saints Go Marching In, and other songs straight from the standard book of jazz classics. And when he wasn't practicing the damn thing, Dougal was following Nora around, singing the praises of Mr. LePage, the leader of the band, and in Nora's eyes, a person as equally at fault in Dougal's newfound hobby as she was. Mr. LePage was saying I'm one of the most natural musicians he's met, Dougal told her for the 4th time that day. Yes, dear, you said, sighed Nora. But who knew, eh? Said Dougal excitedly. Just think, if I'd started playing as a youngster instead of waiting until now, I could have been the next Louis Armstrong. He gave an animated little wave that made him look more like Louis Spence in Nora's opinion. Right, better get some practicing. Yes, dear. Do you have to practice quite so much when you're at home? Only... Her voice trailed off under the withering look Dougal was giving her, one which, she noticed to her consternation, she usually gave to him. Of course I do, said Dougal. The summer concert's only 3 weeks away. Mr. LePage says we've all to put in the extra hour's work. And with that, he disappeared upstairs, and a few seconds later was happily and loudly practicing the opening riff to La Bamba. Nora thought she might have to have words with Mr. LePage. It could be worse, said Sheila. Nora had recounted the recent turn of events to her friend at their weekly Thursday morning coffee, which, due to the incessant tooting and hooting that now filled her home, Nora had insisted they had at Sheila's instead. How? Replied Nora. It could have been the drums. Don't even joke about it, said Nora firmly. Look, said Sheila, it's just a phase. They all go through it when they retire. My bird took up home brewing. Didn't last long. Beer didn't taste nice? Well, you could say that, Sheila replied diplomatically. Bert got the mixture wrong and ended up having to have his stomach pumped. Didn't seem so keen after that. Saved me a fortune on paint stripper when we had the bathroom redecorated, mind. Nora sipped her coffee, not entirely sure what she was supposed to say to that. Don't worry about it, said Sheila. Dougal will get bored of this trumpet business before you know it. Trust me. But as the days rolled on, Dougal's practicing continued to increase. And whenever Nora asked if he'd consider taking a break, his response was always, but there's some concerts coming up. Admitting defeat, Nora began to spend hours out of the house, the irony of which was not lost on her. More often than not, she'd walk and walk until her feet took her to somewhere quiet. It wasn't, she kept telling herself, that Dougal was no good. On the contrary, he clearly had some talent. It was more that he never stopped. His whole world had become trumpet-shaped. When he wasn't playing, he was polishing it, or popping down to the shops to buy new sheet music, or pick up some CDs of jazz classics to get him in the right frame of mind. Which might be all right for Dougal, but from Nora's point of view, it meant that even when he wasn't playing the trumpet, there was some other bugger blaring out of her stereo who was. Worse still, Dougal's love of the trumpet seemed to have coincided with the discovery of BBC4, and he was insisting on exposing Nora to documentary after documentary on Miles Davis, Louis Armstrong and Roy Castle, who, up until then, Nora had quite liked. With a week to go until the concert and Nora's patience at breaking point, Dougal came back from practice with some exciting news. I've been promoted, he shouted gleefully. First trumpet. Oh, well done, dear, Nora said with as much enthusiasm as she could muster, whilst wondering if this would mean even more practice. It was Ronnie Spencer's job, continued Dougal, but Mr. LePage told me he wants me to do it instead. Well, it's no surprise, really. Ronnie's been on rocky ground for a while. His eyesight's so poor he can't see half the notes. How they still let him drive that van of his is beyond me. Anyway, Mr. LePage said he can play second trumpet, which is quite gracious considering. Was Ronnie okay with that? Asked Nora, fairly sure Dougal hadn't asked. Oh, I think he was, said Dougal in a manner that confirmed her suspicions. Anyway, better put some practice in. Only a week to the concert, you know. And off he went, leaving Nora to enjoy a few seconds of precious silence before the honking began in earnest. The next 7 days passed, at least from Nora's point of view, slowly and loudly. But eventually Friday night arrived, and like the dutiful wife she was, she made her way to the community centre where the concert was taking place and sat herself in the front row. Privately, she had debated whether to bother coming or whether she should take the opportunity to enjoy a few hours of peace at home. But, she'd reasoned, it was her fault, sort of, that Dougal was doing this in the first place, and she couldn't miss his moment in the spotlight, even if all she wanted to do was curl up on the sofa and watch any channel other than BBC4. Slowly the hall began to fill up, mostly with wives and husbands of the other band members, and as they took their seats, Nora found herself wondering if their houses had been disrupted by constant noise in the last few weeks too. Nora also noticed that the reviewer from the local paper was in, sat at the other end of the front row, with his notebook already open in his lap. At 7:30 precisely, the band made their way to the stage to polite applause. The infamous Mr. LePage thanked the audience for coming, and then, without further ado, turned to the musicians and raised his baton. As soon as the music started, the strangest thing happened. Any bitterness or resentment that Nora felt towards Dougal or Mr. LePage melted away. There was no denying it. The band was superb. In her continued annoyance at the noise Dougal had been filling her house with for the last few weeks, it had never occurred to her that when added to the band as a whole, it could sound this good. For the first time since Dougal had begun his hobby, Nora was enjoying herself. The evening flew by, and when Dougal stood up to play his solo in a brass band version of ABBA's Thank You for the Music, Nora applauded harder than anyone. Soon though, too soon for Nora, the show was over, and after one final encore, the band left the stage. Nora waited outside the community centre for Dougal, who emerged, trumpet in hand, chatting animatedly to Ronnie Spencer. Ronnie, spotting Nora, seized the initiative and made a beeline for his van. "So," said Dougal, setting his trumpet down, "what did you think?" "You were wonderful," said Nora. And she meant it. "It went well, didn't it?" he smiled. "Hey, and you'll never guess what. That chap from the local paper only wants to do an article on me and my trumpet. Local interest story, apparently." "Oof, that's excellent news," said Nora, not honestly sure it was interesting, but not really wanting to say so. "I know. Listen, I know I've been a bit of a nuisance these past few weeks, but..." Crash! Nora and Dougal both jumped back in horror as Ronnie Spencer's van reversed back into their car, missing them both by inches. "Sorry," shouted Ronnie, leaning out of the window. "Didn't see you there." "Oh, that's okay, Ronnie," called Nora, her heart pounding. "No harm done." It was at this point that she noticed Dougal staring in horror at the back wheel of the van. He bent down and picked up his trumpet, or rather, what was left of it. The van had gone straight over it, flattening it in a second. "So, was it deliberate?" asked Sheila, as Nora told her all about the incident at their weekly coffee. "No idea. Ronnie maintains it was an accident. And after all, his eyesight is rather poor." Sheila frowned. "How did Dougal take it?" Nora took a sip of her coffee. He cried all the way home. "I told him he could buy another one, but he kept going on about affinity between man and instrument." "What does that mean then?" Sheila asked. "No idea. Probably something he heard on BBC4. Anyway, he insisted on going to see Mr. LePage to see if he could do anything. But he told Dougal it was ruined. That man from the paper heard about what happened and wrote it into his piece though. Dougal's bugle, the sound heard only once. Dougal liked that, said it made him sound like a folk hero." "So that's that then," said Sheila. "No more trumpet and you've got a quiet house again." Nora sighed. "Well, yes and no. You see, Mr. LePage told Dougal that whilst his trumpet was gone, he had too much talent for one instrument anyway, and actually there was a spot available in the band that needed filling urgently. So yesterday, Dougal took delivery of a full-size drum kit and has been bashing away ever since." "Oh dear," said Sheila. "Yes," nodded Nora, a resigned look on her face. thinking of asking Ronnie Spencer if I can borrow his van.